Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/BrianEDenton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Chapter 72. 2 months had elapsed since the news of the Battle of Austerlitz and the loss of Prince Andrew had reached Bald Hills, and in spite of the letter sent through the embassy and all the searches made, his body had not been found, nor was he on the list of prisoners. What was worse for all his relations was the fact that there was still a possibility of his having been picked up on the battlefield by the people of the place, and that he might now be lying, recovering or dying, alone among strangers, and unable to send news of himself. The gazettes from which the old prince first heard of the defeat of Austerlitz stated, as usual, very briefly and vaguely, that after brilliant engagements the Russians had had to retreat, and had made their withdrawal in perfect order. The old prince understood from the official reports that our army had been defeated. A week after the Gazette report of the Battle of Austerlitz came a letter from Kutuzov informing the prince of the fate that had befallen his son. "Your son," wrote Kutuzov, "fell before my eyes, a standard in his hand, and at the head of a regiment. He fell as a hero, worthy of his father and his fatherland. To the great regret of myself and of the whole army, it is still uncertain whether he is alive or not. I comfort myself and you with the hope that your son is alive, for otherwise he would have been mentioned among the officers found on the field of battle, a list of whom has been sent under a flag of truce." After receiving this news late in the evening, when he was alone in his study, the old prince went for his walk as usual next morning, but he was silent with his steward, the gardener, and the architect, and though he looked very grim, he said nothing to anyone. When Princess Mary went to him at the usual hour, he was working at his lathe, and, as usual, did not look round to her. "Ah, Princess Mary," he said suddenly in an unnatural voice, throwing down his chisel. The wheel continued to revolve by its own impetus, and Prince Mary long remembered the dying creak of that wheel, which merged in her memory with what followed. She approached him, saw his face, and something gave way within her. Her eyes grew dim. By the expression of her father's face, not sad, not crushed, but angry and working unnaturally, she saw that hanging over her head and about to crush her was some terrible misfortune, the worst in life, one she had not yet experienced, irreparable and incomprehensible, the death of one she loved. "Father, Andrew," said the ungraceful, awkward princess, with such an indescribable charm of sorrow and self-forgetfulness that her father could not bear her look, but turned away with a sob. "Bad news. He's not among the prisoners or among the killed, Kutuzov writes." And he screamed as piercingly as if he wished to drive the princess away by that scream, "Killed!" The princess did not fall down or faint. She was already pale, but on hearing these words her face changed, and something brightened in her beautiful, radiant eyes. It was as if joy, a supreme joy, apart from the joys and sorrows of this world, overflowed the great grief within her. She forgot all fear of her father, went up to him, took his hand, and drawing him down, put her arm around his thin, scraggy neck. "Father," she said, "do not turn away from me. Let us weep together." "Scoundrels! Blackguards!" shrieked the old man, turning his face away from her. "Destroying the army, destroying the men, and why? Go and tell Liza." The princess sank helplessly into an armchair beside her father and wept. She saw her brother now as he had been at the moment when he took leave of her and of Liza, his look tender yet proud. She saw him tender and amused as he was when he put on the little icon. Did he believe it? Had he repented of his unbelief? Was he now there in the realms of eternal peace and blessedness? She thought. "Father, tell me how it happened," she asked through her tears. "Go, go! Killed in battle, with the best of Russian men, and Russia's glory were led to destruction. Go, Princess Mary. Go and tell Liza. I will follow." When Princess Mary returned from her father, the little princess sat working and looked up with that curious expression of inner, happy calm peculiar to pregnant women. It was evident that her eyes did not see Princess Mary, but were looking within, into herself, at something joyful and mysterious taking place within her. "Mary," she said, moving away from the embroidery frame and lying back, "give me your hand." She took her sister-in-law's hand and held it below her waist. Her eyes were smiling expectantly. Her downy lip rose and remained lifted in childlike happiness. Princess Mary knelt down before her and hid her face in the folds of her sister-in-law's dress. There, do you feel it? I feel so strange. And do you know, Mary, I am going to love him very much," said Liza, looking with bright and happy eyes at her sister-in-law. Princess Mary could not lift her head. She was weeping. "What is the matter, Mary?" "Nothing. Only I feel sad about Andrew," she said, wiping away her tears on her sister-in-law's knee. Several times in the course of the morning, Princess Mary began trying to prepare her sister-in-law, and every time began to cry. Unobservant as was the little princess, these tears, the cause of which she did not understand, agitated her. She said nothing, but looked about uneasily, as if in search of something. Before dinner, the old prince, of whom she was always afraid, came into her room with a peculiarly restless and malign expression, and went out again without saying a word. She looked at Princess Mary, then sat thinking for a while with that expression of attention to something within her that is only seen in pregnant women, and suddenly began to cry. "Has anything come from Andrew?" she asked. "No. You know it's too soon for news. But my father is anxious, and I feel afraid." "So there's nothing?" "Nothing," answered Princess Mary, looking firmly with her radiant eyes at her sister-in-law. She had determined not to tell her, and persuaded her father to hide the terrible news from her till after her confinement, which was expected within a few days. Princess Mary and the old prince each bore and hid the grief in their own way. The old prince would not cherish any hope. He made up his mind that Prince Andrew had been killed, and though he sent an official to Austria to seek for traces of his son, he ordered a monument from Moscow, which he intended to erect in his own garden to his memory, and he told everybody that his son had been killed. He tried not to change his former way of life, but his strength failed him. He walked less, ate less, slept less, and became weaker every day. Princess Mary hoped. She prayed for her brother as living, and was always awaiting news of his return. All right, that concludes my reading of chapter 72. I'll now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, Day 72. The O'er-Fraught Heart. In today's chapter, we're told of the Bolkonsky home's reaction to the news of Prince Andrew's disappearance. Once again, Tolstoy provides us with two contrasting reactions to a common subject of the human experience. Today's subject is grief. First, we have old Prince Bolkonsky. He's told in a letter from Kutuzov that Prince Andrew is missing, though not on a list of the dead or of the captured. His current whereabouts are unknown. The only thing that is known for certain is that he was shot in battle. The old prince, holding out no hope for his son's survival, reacts to this news with his usual irascibility, but he also attempts to suffer his grief silently. We're told that, though he looks grim, he says nothing to anyone. He does, however, shriek in anguish when he eventually speaks to his daughter about what has happened. This silent suffering subjects the old prince to much mental and physical degradation, for, as Malcolm once counseled Macduff, the grief that does not speak whispers the overfraught heart and bids it break. His daughter, Princess Mary, takes a different tack. She cherishes hope. Hope empowers her to avoid the deep sorrow of her father. She places her faith in God and the protective powers of the icon she gave to her brother before he left for the war. Tolstoy makes it clear he believes Princess Mary's coping method is superior to that of her father's. The old prince rages, unable to accept what has happened. His major problem is that nearly all his striving is an attempt to impose order on a decidedly disordered world. His strict routines and habits are all continuously upset by an indifferent, chaotic cosmos. Mary, on the other hand, while still grieving, recognizes that these things are out of her control and gives them up to a higher power. This relieves her of a certain amount of grief and suffering. Both father and daughter, however, share a fear of death. Grieving over the loss of a loved one is natural. We all do it. But death is a fart. Many of us deny its presence. The closer we are to it, the more likely we'll be brought to tears. And given the inevitability of its occurrence, seeking to avoid it is a chasing after the wind, or, in this case, breaking it. Might be better, then, to understand death for what it really is, and live accordingly. Daily meditation. I cannot escape from death. Shall I not escape from the fear of death? But shall I die lamenting and trembling? For the origin of perturbation is this, to wish for something, and that this should not happen. Epictetus, The Discourses. Alright, so that concludes my reading and reflection on chapter 72. I hope you liked it. Thanks so much for listening. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation at PayPal. The links to all that are below. Your support, as always, is greatly appreciated. Tomorrow we will be reading and reflecting on chapter 73. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.